Hi guys, it's Goose here, and in this video we're going to find out why Eric Clapton stopped using Gibson guitars. From Eric's early career, he built his reputation as a guitar player playing through Gibson electric guitars. In fact, he played them exclusively between 1965 up until about 1970. Clapton's first Gibson was a 1964 cherry red Gibson ES335. In fact, he would keep this guitar for the next 40 years and sold it in an auction in June 2004. And of course, in June 1965, Clapton bought his very famous Cherry Sunburst 1960s Gibson Les Paul. Okay guys, before we dive into this, it's worth noting that Clapton never completely abandoned the Gibson brand. In fact, only recently he was using a Gibson L5 for select numbers at concerts. And he's also played a Gibson Chet Atkins acoustic on stage. And from time to time he uses Gibson models in his studio work. He purchased Brownie second-hand at Sound City in London on 7th of May 1967, a few days before Cream flew to New York to record Disraeli Gears. He had been promising himself one since seeing Buddy Holly playing a Maple Net Stratocaster on television as a boy, and he had been blown away by Buddy Guy's use of a Strat on an album called Folk Festival of the Blues, which was released in 1963. Later he went to see Buddy Guy at the Marquee in London, and around the same time he saw Steve Winwood playing the same instrument. Significantly, also Jimi Hendrix used this instrument. Around this time, Eric was using the full SG in Cream exclusively. Eric didn't like the rosewood fingerboards that Fender had been putting on all Stratocasters from 1959, so he decided to find a second-hand model. Obviously, these Fenders produced a thinner, brighter sound than the fatter, warmer tone associated with the Les Paul and the SG. In fact, we didn't really see this Stratocaster until around 3 years later. And if you check out my guitar history of Eric Clapton, you can see a very interesting fact that Eric Clapton swapped the necks of a Fender Telecaster and his Brownie Strat. You can see the Telecaster being used at the Hyde Park concert with Steve Winwood in the band Blind Faith. Eric has said of the Stratocaster, "What I always looked for on a Strat was a maple neck that had been worn out. If it looked brand new, that it was, obviously you know. It was like a restaurant. If it is lots of people there, you know it's going to be good food. So I just thought if it had all those kind of worn out patches, it meant that it had to be, well favoured." And this is why Eric prefers a maple neck as opposed to a slabboard or laminate rosewood neck. Brownie was first used on stage on the tour with Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett. And you can see it here in this photo from 1970. This would mean that the Strat was put back together before this date. So the guitar was put back together between mid and late 1969, and we know this as the Telly was last seen with its neck on July in Helsinki, while the Strat wasn't used until early 1970. Eric said in Guitar Player magazine in 1970, "I still play a Les Paul, but with Delaney and Bonnie I use an old Stratocaster I've acquired, which is really, really good. A great sound. It's just right for that kind of bag I was playing with them. I just set the switch between the first and the middle pickups. There is a little place where you can catch it so that you can get the special sound somehow. I get more rhythm and blues or rock kind of sound that way." Eric nicknamed this guitar Brownie, and it appeared with him on the cover of his first solo album and across the back cover of Layla and other assorted love songs. So ever since that Delaney and Bonnie tour, Eric has been using the Fender Stratocaster as his main guitar, with the intention of counteracting his star cult following that began to form around him after Cream. Clapton assembled a new band composed of Delaney and Bonnie's former rhythm section, Bobby Whitlock as keyboardist and vocalist, Carl Raddle as the bassist, and drummer Jim Gordon. It was his intention to show that he was a member of an ensemble. It was around this period that Clapton was increasingly influenced by the band, and specifically their album Music from Big Pink. Eric stated, "What I appreciate about the band was that they were more concerned with the songs and singing. They would have 3 and 4-part harmonies, and the guitar was put back into perspective as being accompaniment. That suited me well because I'd gotten so tired of the virtuosity, or the pseudo-virtuosity thing of long, boring guitar solos, just because they were expected. The band brought things back into perspective. The priority was the song." He continued to use Brownie, and it was used on the whole of the album Layla and other assorted love songs, including the title track Layla. When a radio interviewer asked Duane Allman how he could differentiate that of Eric's and Duane's playing, Duane replied, "I play the Gibson and Eric plays the Fender, all the way through. If you can tell a Gibson from a Fender, you can tell who plays what, and if you can't, you just go ahead and hallucinate." From the 1970s, for recording, he would also be using the guitar he became most associated with, the Fender Stratocaster nicknamed Blackie. It was actually a hybrid of 3 guitars that he bought second-hand a few years earlier in 1970 at a Showbug music shop in Nashville, where he purchased 6 or 7 vintage Strats for about $100 each. Then, back in England, he gave one to George, one to Pete Townsend, and another to Stevie Winwood. The others he kept, taking the best bits and turning them into one guitar, a black-bodied maple neck instrument circa 1956 and 1957. The introduction to the book The Stratocaster Chronicles contains a piece by Clapton himself. Clapton says, "I never did meet Leo Fender, but I wish I had. If I could go back and somehow talk to him about the Stratocaster, I'd say, you've created something that can't be bettered, really. How did you do that? I know there were prototypes with the Telecaster and the Esquire and some early experimental stages, but nevertheless, the fact that he got to this conclusion so quickly is remarkable, isn't it? Leo Fender was so far in advance of anybody else, developing the Strat to the point where it just can't be bettered even now. My hat's off to him." The reason why I hadn't played Strats earlier was that the necks always looked so narrow. I thought I won't be able to bend any strings, no room, but in fact I was wrong. And any Strat that I'd seen up until that time had a rosewood fingerboard, and I had an aversion to rosewood fingerboards. Don't ask me why, even though some of my earlier guitars had them. I'd always preferred ebony. I liked the silky finish. Of course, when I got my hands on a maple neck Strat with a white fingerboard, I was surprised at how easy it was to play. I had a lot of influences when I took up the Strat. First there was Buddy Holly and Buddy Guy. Hank Marvin was the first well-known person over here in England who was using one, but that wasn't really my kind of music. Steve Winwood had so much credibility, and when he started playing one I thought, oh, if he can do it, I can do it. Picking up a Stratocaster makes me play a bit differently. I find that over the last few years I play more with my fingers because of the way it sits on the guitar. I don't feel the need to use a pick quite so much as I would with any other guitar, where the bridge sits higher off the body. With the Strat, the bridge is almost flush with the guitar, so my hand rests on the body, part of my heel rests on the bridge, and then my fingers rest on the scratch plate. It's really easy to play either way, but I found more and more that I'm using just my fingers. It's got those famous lead tones, but it's so versatile. You can use it in any kind of rhythmic sense, as well as great big power chords, all that really light kind of Talma Motown sound with very little volume. Unlike most other electric guitars, it sounds almost better when the guitar's volume knob is on 2 or 3, really unamplified and quiet. I really like the old coil pickups, especially that middle and bridge combination. I used that for the solo in Bell Bottom Blues, which would be a classic example of that sound. But I've got those noiseless pickups now and the active circuitry, and I get so many different sounds coming out of the Stratocaster that it's hard to compare it with any other guitar. My other guitars, I only visit them from time to time. I rarely use anything else but the Strat. So guys, in conclusion, I think that Eric found a new voice playing the Fender Stratocaster, and it would really fit the style of music that he was playing from the 1970s onwards. And I feel once he developed his voice on the Fender Stratocaster, it was hard for him to return back to a Gibson guitar. Thanks guys for watching this video, and I'll see you soon. God bless.